Bryant. I'm a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and the owner of Peas and Hoppiness. I'm excited today to share with you one of my favorite plant-based meals in honor of Earth Month, which has been happening in April. Earth Day was last Friday, and this is a great way to celebrate the Earth and do our part in preventing climate change. One of the biggest impacts that we can make as individuals is to lower how we eat on the food chain. So instead of eating foods like beef or lamb, which are some of the more higher energy intensive foods to produce, eating plant-based options can be a great option to lower your personal environmental footprint. In addition, this is just really delicious. It's packed full of nutrition because we have all these different vegetables that are full of antioxidants and vitamins and minerals, and so this kind of a win-win. It's good for our bodies and it's good for the planet. So if you are interested to make this recipe, you can follow along on the blog post and even download a printable version of the recipe, which I am following here. And we are making these vegan roasted cauliflower taco bowls. Now I know that vegan sometimes means if you are typically a meat eater, that this might be a word of caution, like, oh no, maybe this isn't going to be flavorful. But let me tell you, these bowls are super flavorful, and there's a couple reasons for that, which I'll explain as we go along. So to start off, I went ahead, I'm preheating our oven to 450 degrees, and the next thing I'm going to do is start cooking our rice. So I have a cup of just white rice, just plain long grain rice, and I'm going to put that in my pot along with 2 cups of water and a half of a teaspoon of salt. So different types of rice require different amounts of water. White rice typically just needs double the amount that you are cooking. So I have 1 cup of rice and 2 cups of water. And now I'm going to add a half teaspoon of salt to this. I'm going to stir it up. I'm going to put a lid on this, and then we're going to cook it. So I've just stirred this all together, the water, the rice, and the salt. Now I'm putting a lid on that, and that'll come to a boil. That's going to cook about 18 minutes while we are prepping the rest of our recipe. So next is to make our seasoning blend. So this is going to be equal parts of everything except for the salt. So I'm going to start with that. We're going to use a half teaspoon of salt, and then we are going to use 1 teaspoon each of chili powder, cumin. These don't have to be exact amounts. You can see that it's not perfect. It's a kind of a heaping. And then 1 teaspoon of smoked paprika. Smoked paprika definitely has, it has almost a sweet taste. It's a really unique flavor, which I think is really fun. Regular paprika has a lot of color to it, but it doesn't have a very strong flavor. So smoked paprika really gives us a nice flavor. So I'm blending this up, and we're going to use this on a couple of different ingredients in the taco bowls. This helps to tie in the flavors of the meal when you use a similar seasoning on different parts of the meal. Now that I've got my seasoning blend, the next is to cut my cauliflower into florets. So I have a head of cauliflower. I've already washed this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this in half, straight down the middle. And you can see that cauliflower is a cruciferous vegetable. That cruciferous is Latin for cross, and that tells us a little bit about the nutrition. Cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts all have similar nutrition. But I'm going to cut this in a V around that stem, and I'm going to cut out that stem, which is too tough to eat, and discard those leaves. You could definitely compost this if that's something that you do. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. We're going to cut a V here, and we're just going to discard that tough stem. A lot of times that is the woody part. The same goes for broccoli. It's going to be a little bit harder to eat, but you can eat the rest of these parts of the cauliflower. So you can see that I cut this in half, and then I cut a V there, and now I'm just going to I'm going to cut this in half, and I'm just sort of cutting each of those little pieces off at where they meet there at the middle. And then I'm going to cut them into just smaller pieces, kind of bite size. I try to keep them a little bit with the stem just to keep them from totally falling apart, but this does not have to be perfect. So I am throwing this on a baking sheet. This is a half baking sheet. If you followed along a couple weeks ago when I talked about different pieces of equipment in your kitchen, this is one of my favorite favorite things that I use all the time, half baking sheet. So a full baking sheet is literally twice as big, so it's very large. It typically wouldn't fit in a home oven. Those are used more in commercial kitchens, but a half baking sheet is perfect. It has very short lip around the edge, which is great for keeping oil on the pan, not letting it fall into your oven, but it's very large, has a large surface area, so it's great for roasting. Roasting, you want a lot of surface area. You want as much of that high heat to touch the different areas of your vegetable as possible. And notice that like I said, I heated the oven to 450 degrees, which is hotter than maybe a lot of you cook. It's hotter than a lot of times I cook. And that's for a couple of reasons. First of all, because this is a 30-minute meal, and we need to cook it at a high temperature to cook quickly, but also because cooking at high temperatures like this there's a scientific process that happens called Maillard Browning. That is the browning that you see on vegetables or meat when they're cooked at really high temperatures. And it's the process of converting some of the longer chain carbohydrates in the fruits and vegetables into sugar. And that doesn't necessarily make your vegetables taste sweet per se, but it does help to cut some of the bitter flavor that is typically associated with vegetables. So if you are not a fan of some vegetables, I highly recommend to try roasting, grilling, or even sauteing on the stove at higher temperatures, because that's going to get that browning, that's going to make those foods taste a little bit better, and you might like something that you didn't know that you liked. I will tell you that roasted cauliflower is one of my favorite things. It tastes totally different than boiled cauliflower because it just has a much deeper, richer flavor. So this originally was the base in this recipe. So if you are looking for a low carb option or just a lighter meal, you don't have to include the rice in this. I am including rice because our family is really active. We have a 13-year-old growing boy who plays lots of sports, so we need lots of calories in our household, and rice is a really excellent plant-based option. Okay, so I have got all of this delicious cauliflower, and I have it in florets. So now I'm going to drizzle this with a couple tablespoons. I'm just going to eyeball it. A couple tablespoons of olive oil. And now we're going to add roughly half of our seasoning mixture. So this doesn't have to be perfect. The other half of this is going to be used in our black beans. So this is going to be more important to season than those black beans. I'm going to use my handy dandy, I don't even know what utensil this is. I've had it forever. I've accidentally burned it on the cast iron skillet, so you can maybe see that it's been melted a little bit. You shouldn't do that. But I hope everybody else has a favorite utensil in their kitchen. If you have a favorite utensil, that's super weird. I'd love to know what it is. You can drop a comment or take a picture and let me know what your favorite kitchen utensil or kitchen gadget is. All right, so we've tossed that a bit. Now my oven isn't quite up to temperature, but I'm going to go ahead and stick this in because that's just going to help kind of give this a head start. That's a trick that I like to use a lot of times when I'm trying to speed up my recipes. With roasting vegetables or with cooking, a lot of times you don't have to wait for the oven to be fully up to temperature. If we were baking a cake, you definitely would need to wait, but for this, it is not that precise, so we can go ahead and stick this in our oven. All right, so that's going to take about 18 minutes. I'll set the timer here. And then let's check on our rice. That rice is just coming to a boil, so I turned down the temperature so that it won't boil over. If it does boil over, just pick up the lid. That'll allow some of that steam to evaporate, and turn down the temperature, put that lid back on, and you'll be good to go. Okay, the next step, while the cauliflower roasts, we're going to add the beans, including the liquid from the can. I love to not have to drain and rinse. I always get the no salt added version, and that's because I like to be able to add my own seasonings. It's not because I don't add any salt, it's because I like to flavor them to taste. Remember that our seasoning blend has some salt in it, so we don't want to over season this. We don't want to have it too salty, so that's why I would recommend to stick with that no salt added. You have a couple of options here. My recipe actually says to mash these a little bit. So if you'd like more of a refried bean texture, then you can use, I'm just using the back of the spatula to mash these a little bit. You could also use a fork, or you could use a potato masher. If you're using a pan that has Teflon on it, like I am, which is wonderful for nonstick, Teflon is not very good for you to ingest. You should always, always, always make sure to use either a plastic or a silicone tool when you're stirring these things, because metal on Teflon will scratch it, and that's what can cause it to start to flake off and get into your food. And eating Teflon is not something that you want to do. It is not good for you. We're going to put it over, let's see, bring to a simmer over low heat, mashing the beans with a fork or potato masher. Cook 8 to 10 minutes until the mixture has thickened, and then we'll remove it from heat. This one I'm not covering because I do want a little bit of the evaporation, which is specified in the recipe. That's why we're cooking it until it has thickened. Okay, so while the cauliflower and beans cook, now we are going to cut our avocado. I have already washed these avocados. I'm a real stickler for washing any fruit or vegetable that you cut through the peel and cut into the flesh. So a banana, maybe you don't need to wash because you're not at all exposing the outside of the peel on the inside, but anything that you cut, like avocado or cantaloupe, watermelon, those sorts of fruits, you of course aren't eating the rind of those foods, but because you're cutting through them into the inside, you'll want to wash them just in case there's any sort of foodborne illness on the outside of your food. You'll wash that off before you get it on the inside. Okay, let's see if my avocado is perfect. How often does that happen? Beautiful. It's just a little bit soft. I know choosing avocados is tricky. I actually bought these last week, so I bought them a little bit more green than usual. And what I'm doing here is I'm cutting around the pit. You can definitely do this with a paring knife if a giant chef's knife like I'm using makes you nervous. And then I twist it, and that will pull apart, and we'll have the avocado. So there's a couple ways you can get this pit out. You can actually push from the outside here. You can push it out there. If that's not working great, you can also lay that down and use your knife, stick it into the pit just a little bit, and then wedge it out. So next we're going to cube this, and I'm going to cut along the inside of the avocado just really gently. So I'm not cutting through the skin on the outside, and I'm cutting that into little cubes. So again, when you're choosing avocados, these are pretty soft and ripe, you'll notice that they're a little bit squishy on the outside, and that tells you that they are going to be soft to eat. I'm going to use a spoon, and I'm just going to take these and I'm going to scrape them out. I'm actually going to use the same bowl as I used for the seasoning because I don't like doing dishes, and so I reuse things as much as possible. Just be careful of cross-contamination. So if you are cooking any raw meat, you would not want to reuse anything that has touched that raw meat. See how easily those cubes just scoop on out of there? So this is sort of like easy peasy guacamole. You can get as fancy or as not fancy as you would like to with your guacamole. So if you want to add, freshly chopped garlic, that would be very delicious, but you don't have to. So we need 1/4 of a teaspoon of garlic salt. So the flavor in this recipe, because we don't have meat, we're adding a lot of different spices, as you've noticed. We're also roasting the cauliflower, like I mentioned. That's how we get a lot of great flavor from that. And now we're adding this super healthy, delicious fat to the meal. This is gonna help with satiety, so fat is great for keeping you full. It's slower to digest, and it's also, has a wonderful creamy mouthfeel, and it will kind of distribute a lot of the different seasonings. So a lot of good things about adding oil. That's also why I added oil to the cauliflower, so it helps to distribute some of those seasonings and makes it taste better. The bonus is that we're using these really healthy fats, so they're very good for your heart. This is not something that you need to avoid for health reasons. These fats are super good for you. They're doing lots of really good things. So you can feel good about how they taste and about how you're treating your body. So there's my poor man's guacamole. Other things I like to add would be a squeeze of lime juice. So here's my lime. I already washed it, again, cutting through the peel. The trick for getting the most juice out of your citrus fruits is to roll this, to smash it, and actually use some pressure. This helps to kind of break up those capsules inside the fruit. And now I'm going to cut it in half, and it's going to be easier to squeeze. So I'm just going to take this and I'm just going to squeeze it straight into my guacamole. Sometimes I like to add tomatoes, diced jalapenos. That's really delicious. The other thing that the lime juice does is it keeps it green. There's an enzyme in lots of different fruits and vegetables that cause the browning. So if you've ever left your avocado in the fridge overnight and it becomes brown, that's because of an enzyme. Same thing with apples, for example. So lime juice has acid, which actually neutralizes that enzyme and stops the browning, so it keeps it fresher. So now I have my cilantro, which I bought last week when I went grocery shopping, and I've kept in the refrigerator in this jar of water. And you can see how beautiful and healthy it is. This is a great way to store those leafy greens if you have room, because they will last much longer than any way else. I am going to rinse these off. I haven't washed them yet. Okay, so I'm going to chop off most of the stems. You can certainly eat the stems, but that's not going to be the most flavor. The most flavor is going to be in these leafy greens. So this calls for 1/4 of a cup. I never really measure. I just chop away and enjoy some of this. Cilantro is another great thing to add to your guacamole if you would like it. Okay, now I've got everything ready. I'm going to check on our rice and see how that's doing, and we'll check on our black beans. Rice is almost done. The black beans have not been simmering, so I increased the temperature just a little bit because we want to see some bubbles in there. That's going to help that evaporation, make them thicker, and not have a lot of watery beans, because that is not what we want. Okay, this is another pro tip that if you are trying to save some time cooking at home, if you are waiting on things to cook like I am now, use this time to clean your kitchen, and then of course you'll have less cleanup later. I like to I have a little hidden jar. It's an old Chobani yogurt container that I'm stuffing all my scraps in. That just helps me keep down on the mess, and I can either compost it or throw it away. Oh yeah, these are looking excellent. Okay, here's a sneak peek. I'm just gonna stir these a little bit, and I'm just gonna stick that back into the oven. I'm going to get ready to show you how we assemble these bowls, because everything is almost done. And this is such an easy, fast recipe. It's also really versatile. So if you'd like to change things up, you can definitely use different types of rice. I use just a plain white long grain rice, which is traditional in Mexican cooking. You can use jasmine rice. You could use brown rice if you would like, but brown rice takes a little bit longer to cook. It typically takes up to 45 minutes, so that's going to be a little bit more challenging in a 30-minute meal. That's one of the reasons why sometimes I like to use quinoa in place of rice. Quinoa is technically a seed, but nutritionally we're treating it as a whole grain, and it only takes about 15 or 20 minutes to cook. So it's a really good option if you would like to use a whole grain but don't want to take the time to use something like brown rice. I'm calling these bowls, but I'm going to put them on a plate because that's going to be a lot prettier. With our other half of a lime, I'm going to just chop that into wedges, and that's how we're going to plate this. We're going to garnish it with these little lime wedges. All right, we have our rice. I'm going to use one of my delightful gifts from my sister-in-law. It says, it's David Rose, and it says, "What does fold in the cheese mean?" Which was one of my favorite scenes. I hope I have some other Schitt's Creek stands. But this is nice and fluffy now, so you can either leave the lid on and just let it rest. You'll want to kind of just fluff it with a fork. But you'll notice that I didn't stir this after it started cooking. You don't need to stir your rice once it's cooking. Just leave it, let it sit there. So once the water is all gone, that's when your rice is done and it's ready to go. I'm just going to go ahead and plate this. So we've got a little bit of rice here. Our black beans, which have been boiling now. In fact, I'm actually going to use a potato masher to mash these. Be super careful because this is metal. I'm just going to mash these a little bit, and that's going to help that liquid to kind of incorporate. If you accidentally bought beans that had salt added in them, go ahead and drain them and rinse them and just add a little bit of water. Rinsing them off really helps cut down on the amount of salt that you're actually getting into your food, so don't feel bad about that. There we go. Now I've got kind of pseudo refried beans here. I'll plate those next to my rice. Now I'm going to give us a good dollop of our guacamole. Remember, this only serves 4 people, so you get a nice healthy dollop there. There we go. And our cauliflower is done. We have this beautiful cauliflower. I'm just going to take some of that, put that on the other side. You will be surprised that the cauliflower might be your favorite thing on this plate. Now, we are going to garnish with our lime wedge and with a little bit of cilantro. This is both for flavor and for a little color. And there you have it. We have our vegan roasted cauliflower taco bowls. So delicious, super easy, less than 30 minutes to make. And I did it on camera, so you too can make this, I promise. Make sure to go to the blog post so that you can read the whole recipe. Scroll down to the bottom and you'll find a printable recipe. Make sure you print that out and leave me a comment to let me know if you make this. Tag me if you take a photo of it. I would love to see your creations. And if you do any variations, which I've made a couple of suggestions on the blog post, let me know what you've changed and how your family liked it. But I hope this is a helpful way to add in some more plants to your lifestyle and learn that eating vegetarian does not have to mean tasteless meals. It can be super delicious. That is my goal, is to provide you with delicious, healthy, nutritious meals that your whole family will enjoy, get you out of those food ruts, and help you to reclaim the joy of mealtime. So thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to catching you again in my kitchen soon. Take care, everybody.